Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Brahim Aoudi, your host for the evening. And today's topic is Conquest for Peace. And to discuss this, we have three guests with us. Nori Thompson, she's a retired attorney, and she's also a Sabeel member, and we will talk about Sabeel later on. Reverend Vaughn Beckman from First Christian Church, Makiki, and also he's the chair of Sabeel organization, and Professor Lutfi, Ramses Lutfi, he's a retired professor of zoology. So welcome, and why don't you begin, Reverend Beckman, about Sabeel, and what is Sabeel, to inform the audience and the viewers about it.
Sabeel is actually an ecumenical center for liberation theology, which was founded predominantly by Christian Palestinians, although it has strong alliance with other people of good faith and other faiths as well. And the purpose of it starting was to try to bring a just peace for all people, especially the Palestinians who felt left out of the picture in so much of what was going on, and to present a realistic picture about their needs and their hopes for liberation.
Yeah, good. And you know, some of the activities that you've had recently had to do with showing videos and giving talks, you know, in terms of the Sabeel organization, to educate the public about, you know, the issues in the Middle East, especially around Palestine, of course. So, Nori, would you say something about some of the recent activities that you have done in Sabeel?
That we've done?
Yeah.
Well, the most recent thing we had was we co-sponsored a video that was, what was the name of our video?
The Hidden Wars of Desert Storm.
Yeah, The Hidden Wars of Desert Storm.
Yeah.
And it was really shocking. It's about the first war in Iraq, so the 1991 war. And it showed, well, it showed very, very many things. It moved very quickly, but the whole gist of it was a tremendous lesson for today, because it showed so many reasons why we shouldn't be doing it this time, and it showed tremendous duplicity on the part of the American government in getting the war started, how it was conducted, the aftermath. I mean, you know, you don't know, it's hard to really believe all the things that were told in that movie. It's so disappointing to our government, you know, because President Bush was shown to actually trick Saddam Hussein, basically, into going to war the first time.
That's the first Bush, yeah. That's true. And also there's another one, other activities like on Palestine in particular. Ramses, would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, well, a few films that we on videos also, which we bought from companies. We sent for them and we got them. And this is after Jenin, which is showing what happened in the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank. And the destruction, willful destruction by the Israeli forces that went in and went on demolishing lots of houses, and actual deliberate destruction. Sometimes showing people inside the houses, and the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers, knew very well that there were people inside, but still they went on demolishing, and people were buried under these. And then the aftermath of the Jenin campaign, or whatever you call it, and the misery that was left behind, and the complete decision by the Israeli authorities not to let any of the international bodies or organizations get in and to investigate what's happening.
Yeah.
So
that's good. In fact, this After Jenin is by Telegale.com, you know, Telegale distributors, and they are in Ireland, and it's a good film. In fact, we have one segment talking about human rights violation and war crimes about Jenin. It is from after Jenin, that film.
Yeah.
So when it's ready, we'll roll.
Yeah. Of course, it's called Jenin.
Another ground zero. And under the circumstances where there were no independent observers allowed in, no journalists, no Red Cross, no form of humanitarian relief or whatever, rumors were rife. Of the 52 deaths that we were able to confirm, almost half of them were civilians. They were not fighters. They included young people, they included elderly people, and for instance, the case of a man in a wheelchair who was shot and killed and then run over by a tank. We investigated the scene. There's no way we're talking about a mistaken identity or that he could have been mistaken for somebody else or something else.
We believe that there is a case to be answered for war crimes. I think that we can feel very confident of that. I think we can be very confident in saying that there were unlawful killings. I think we can be confident in saying that there was property destruction. I think we can be confident in saying that there was the use of civilians for military operation, clearly in contravention of the Geneva Convention. And for this reason, we say that there's a case to be answered for.
Yeah, so here, like along the lines you were describing, so this is after Jenin, and so you were talking about another film.
Yeah, another film on the same lines, and it's showing the destruction and the horror that were met by, sort of meted on the Palestinians, and I think they concentrated here on ad-lib interviews with little children and the misery, and in spite of the misery they were in, they were showing great insistence to go on living and fighting against this injustice that's being meted on them.
Yeah. In fact, Reverend Beckman, on what kind of programs are you thinking about in the immediate future about like showing those films or other films?
I think we'll be showing some others as well. We've gotten good response from the community. We need to educate people, and we need to awaken people to see that there is a lot going on that the mainstream press is not showing them that is happening to innocent people, civilians, on both sides that are trying to say enough is enough. We need to move forward for real peace.
Yeah. And Nori, in terms of how are you finding your educational efforts? Are there people responding to it? Have you been able to connect with other organizations and so on?
Well, there has been a lot of interaction with other organizations. The Hidden Wars of Desert Storm, we co-sponsored with Friends. And I haven't really been going to meetings very much lately. I think maybe Vaughn might be better to address that question as to, but I know there's been, there's been a church outreach why don't you tell about it, Vaughn?
We've had a church outreach, which I think would be faith community outreach. It hasn't been exclusively Christian. But we've also had a media outreach. We've talked with the editorial boards of both major newspapers. We've had meetings with, or at least have had tried to, maybe some of the staff members of both senators and congresspersons. And all of those meetings have been favorable, but it's been important to us that we try to touch as many areas as we can to say, wait a minute, there's more to the story than you're hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we have met with Senator Inouye's staff, and we met with Representative Abercrombie. We've done, as Vaughn was saying, quite a lot of outreach to make contact with our congressional delegation, and we were very pleased when, I'm not saying it had necessarily anything to do with us, but when nobody in the whole congressional delegation voted to oppose Bush's resolution in favor of war against Iraq. That was really very good for Hawaii, that we seem to be strong in that area.
Yeah, very good. And yeah,
There is also,
yes.
excuse me, there is also a connection with the NION, the Not in Our Name organization, which joined us during the showing of the Desert Storm, the war.
And some university peace initiative as well at the University of Hawaii as well. That's good. In fact, we have another segment from another film called Jenin Jenin, and this is by Arab Film Distributors, and it's based in Seattle, and one can reach them at arabfilm.com. And it shows the resistance even after the destruction by the upcoming generations. So when the tape is ready.
مخيم والله ببيع حياتي عشانه. مخيم كل إشي، يعني بالنسبة مش إلي بس، لكل الدنيا، لكل أهل المخيم. روحنا المخيم، روحنا حياتنا، كل إشي إلنا يعني، عشان يضل شامخ وواقف، وما زال واقف وشامخ. كل ما تروح بجهة من المخيم لازم تلاقي مرة أو شخص بعيط لا ابنه لا داره لا مثلا فقيد مش لاقيه. كل شخص بالمخيم، ما فيش حدا بالمخيم يعني ما بكاش على اللي راح عليه. بس هذا كله ما بهمنا. هدوه صحيح هدوه، راح نرد نبني من جديد ومش راح نهتم بهم، وراح يبني على أساس المقاومة، وراح شارون طول حياته يحسب حساب لمخيم جنين.
So here's, you know, the result of destruction of the camp and, you know, the invasion that Israel has. It conquered the Palestinian Authority areas in the West Bank and Gaza. And what happens, rather than have like people succumb to their influence, it is more and more resistance, you know, because people cannot live under such inhumane conditions and so on. In fact, we want to go, before we comment on things, we want to go to another segment that we have of another Sabeel member, George Hudis, and I interviewed him. And this segment is a bit long, like about 3 minutes, but it's rather instructive, and then we can discuss it when it's ready.
As an American, my country provides over $3 million in direct aid to Israel every year. That's aside from another $3 billion, aside from another $2 billion in loan guarantees. And if we consider indirect costs, we may be providing as much as $10 billion a year in aid to Israel. That's aside from private funds that are raised. So as an American, I feel that the money, our tax dollars that are going to Israel today are not being well spent. I think the leverage that that kind of aid gives us could be much more creatively used to bringing both parties to the peace table and achieving a situation in which we both have justice and lead to peace. The second basis for my personal involvement, why I'm motivated, is I am Jewish. I grew up as the son of survivors. And so I grew up with all the stories about the concentration camps, listening to the crying and the tragedies. And as a small boy, I went around with my small can to the neighborhood, which was not Jewish, asking for donations to plant trees in the state of Israel. And of course, this was a big thing in the community in which I grew up. We're talking about the late 40s and early 50s. So I understand where the Jews have come from in terms of the history of persecution. But as I grew older, I also began to understand the role that colonialism played in terms of shifting this problem, which was overwhelmingly a Western problem, a European problem in terms of the persecution of the Jews, shifting that problem to just creating this Jewish state in the Middle East, as if there were no other people there, as if there wasn't another nation there. And while I don't think we can go back in history completely, I wouldn't know how to do that. I do feel that it is long overdue that that the Palestinians receive some sort of justice, and I am personally feel that what Israel is doing today, in terms of the Palestinians, is shattering a heritage. I mean, the heritage that many Jewish people, myself included, have looked back on their history and seen a lot of things to be very proud of in terms of participation in humanitarian movements, humanitarian philosophy and all of that. But what is going on in Israel-Palestine today is a tragedy.
Yeah, I want to remind our viewers that we'd love to hear from you. It's a live show, 956-5670 on Oahu, Neighbor Islands, 1-800-342-7949. Comments, questions are welcome. Thanks. So Nori, here you have Israel that has violated like all kinds of UN resolutions vis-a-vis the question of the refugees and in terms of just human treatment of the conquered, in this case the Palestinian people on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So could you say something about that particular aspect?
Well, the whole Israel-Palestine situation has been called the sinkhole of American credibility. And that's very well said, because the problem is that here in the United States, we're not at all informed as to what's going on in Palestine and Israel. Basically, our press hardly talks about it, and if they do, it's kind of in a casual, offhand way, so that people who aren't in tuned, we're very in tuned, you know, for this is our big issue. But, you know, for instance, the press will say, just refer to this occupation of Palestine and all the problems as just maybe the Middle East problem. So they'll say something like, oh, well, Iraq is going to add to the anger of the Arabs, the anger that they already feel about the Middle East problem. So, I mean, what my point is that if you're not listening for that, you know, there's many people who are not informed at all. And the main point I'm trying to make is that the world and the UN are very in tune to what's going on. And in fact, I was looking on the internet today, and as far as resolutions go, you know, the main issue with Iraq these days is resolutions. There were 12 pages of Security Council resolutions, you know, on this issue of Palestine, and there were 31 pages of General Assembly resolutions. And then on top of that, there are all the resolutions that have been tried to be passed by the UN that have been blocked by the United States. So they have been following this issue. They follow it on a daily basis, and the United States has been blocking the UN's ability to do something about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And when George Bush says, we've got to make the UN stand for something, show resolve, show that it's not just a debating society, show that it means what it says, right? This is what George Bush has been saying over and over again. The UN, you know, they can't believe their ears, because here, that is, you know, that is the very United States that has been blocking the UN over all these years, trying to get something done in the Palestine-Israel situation.
Yeah. So, Reverend Beckman, why do you think, what are some of the domestic politics that might be involved in having the United States so much supportive of Israel, and even when it is not following up or, you know, implementing those UN resolutions? Is there something in your judgment, or things?
I think there are some things that put a lot of pressure on our administration, and that is what we would call Christian Zionism. And it has developed into an unbelievable ally with the Israeli government concerning the fact that they basically believe that Israel has divine right to the land, and that they believe the Bible says that. Therefore, nothing can change their mind, because if they're not going to believe that, taking the Bible very literally, then they're not believing, quote, the Bible.
Yeah.
Our president has been supported by many of the people that believe a literal view of the Bible. The Christian Zionists obviously have developed through the evangelicals, which are a large group in this country right now. And at this point, all of the strong leaders like Falwell, Robertson, Tim LaHaye, and others they're telling him, you are the man of God. You've got to do the right thing that God is telling you to do. You must support Israel. Blank card, no questions asked. And I'm not sure he's a Christian Zionist himself, but he certainly feels much pressure from the people that have voted for him.
You are yourself Christian fundamentalist, or
I'm an ex I actually I actually graduated from a school founded by Falwell and seminary, and of course we were taught this whole idea that you understand the Bible through this lens, that every bit of prophecy is to be taken literally, and therefore you must believe that Israel in the last days is going to be going to blossom and become the place where Jesus is going to return to rule the world. I've moved quite away from that. I think sometimes when you believe the Bible too literally, you're actually worshiping the Bible, not God. And at that point, I think you lose touch with reality about what's really important. And I think the important thing is to stand for justice and to love mercy and to, quote, walk humbly with God. I'm not so sure that this country's doing a good job at that right now.
Yeah. Ramses, from your perspective, because you are a Christian Arab also, so when you find these Christian Zionists saying this, like, go kill the Arabs and get rid of them and support the conquest that's happening by Israel over the Palestinians, what do you think as a Christian? I mean, what do you think?
I honestly am very much affected by this, because I take it very emotionally, which I shouldn't, of course. But the whatever is being said here in the United States about fundamentalism and the bad things that are coming from fundamentalists and the terrorists who are fundamentalists and so on. And now here in the United States, we have a very strong fundamentalist movement. Fundamentalism is wrong anywhere, not only in Islam, in Judaism, in Christianity, anywhere fundamentalism is a one-sided kind of view of the world and lack of consideration for other cultures or other religions, and also dehumanizing the enemy. Dehumanizing. And of course, this brings us to one of the most important things, which is the 9/11 basic causes. The United States government has been trying to hide the roots of the problem, which is the Western imperialist deeds in all over the ages, in the Middle East and all over the world. And the great injustices that were done in these areas, and of course the absolute support by the United States of the Israeli atrocities in Palestine. So they forgot all these things, and at the same time they have a very strong influence of a fundamentalist movement in the United States itself.
Yeah, we have a caller, Stuart, from New York. So, hello, Stuart.
Good evening to you.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
I'm terrific.
Long time no see.
I know, but
yeah,
we'll see you soon.
you're in here, huh?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay.
I'm here in Honolulu.
All right.
And I've turned on this program. And I've heard the commentaries.
All right.
And I guess I have my own 2 cents to either add or throw in, or however one does this.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
So I look at this situation and I realize it's a historic, religious, economic, political situation that's been going on for many, many years. When I say what's going on is the strife and antagonism in the so-called Middle East, countries, some of which were created by the Western powers, as the last gentleman said, after World War I. But I look at it not so much as trying to go back and trying to find fault or accusations, but rather to looking at the human aspect of the situation, and that everybody has rights and everybody has a point of view, but it just doesn't get settled by the battling that goes on and who committed the atrocities who didn't. So when you go back to 1947, 1948, the body called the United Nations, for better or for worse, creates this country, this state of Israel, as an independent country, whether the vote was close, whether there was politicking, whatever the ideas were. Here was this country created.
Yeah.
And after the creation, you have 5 countries or surrounding them, attacking them. And these people had to defend themselves. I mean, it was an amazing thing when you think about the wars, as horrible as they were.
Yeah.
And so now you have these poor people, the Palestinians, who were apparently thrown off their land, and there were atrocities in various villages, etc., that the 4 of you know about. But the settlement can't come, apparently, while violence keeps going on, whether you call them suicide bombers or whatever the Israeli army might be doing, or you talked about Jenin before, and you showed that horrible, battered place. But Jenin came about after a suicide bombing. I think it was the Passover, so-called Passover suicide bombing.
Yeah.
So it's hit.
But Stuart, that would not justify that particular destruction as we saw it. But anyway, I want to show a video, if you don't mind, a segment from from an Israeli academic, and then you're welcome to call back also. Yeah.
Okay. But I don't want to hog the time.
No, but because the question of the Israeli academic is interesting, because there's a lot of criticism in Israel, much more so than the criticism from outside Israel, especially in the United States. Criticism of Israeli policy from Israelis themselves. So when the tape is ready, we roll.
Can I say just one thing on that?
Establishment of the State of Israel was based on the transfer of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and the destruction of the Palestinian entity. Unfortunately, even now, for most Israelis, they don't accept any responsibility to these events, any kind of responsibility to these events. They don't accept the fact that you can't distinguish the establishment of Israel from the Nakba, from the destruction of Palestine as an entity.
Yeah, so here we have, one Israeli academic talking about, how the creation of Israel was and so on. So any comments on this, Ramses or Nuri or Vaughn?
I want to sort of answer the gentleman who was talking now about the wars that happened after the declaration of the State of Palestine by the United Nations.
State of Israel.
The State of Israel, sorry. And how the United Nations passed a resolution dividing that area between Israel and Palestine. Two entities. It was very clear. And they gave Israelis 56% of the land, and they gave the Palestinians the other 44% of the land. And then Israel knew from the beginning that the Arabs are not going to accept that because it was extremely unfair for them. So they were preparing for war before the Arabs did try to get what they belong to them, what belongs to them, the land. But Israel took advantage of that war and grabbed much more than they were allotted by the United Nations, and it resulted in 22% of the land, instead of 44% that were allotted the Palestinians, they got 22%.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. But, you know, and also these things are also documented by Israeli historians themselves, you know, called the Israeli revisionist historians.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they went through the archives of Israeli archives because they opened them after 35 years or something like that. And these things are well documented. It's not like only from an Arab point of view or from a UN point of view, etc., but from Israelis who really care about Israel itself, you know, and that's why they want to have peace and so on. But we have the same Israeli academic, Amnon. We have another short segment. It's important to take a look at it, and then we come back and talk more.
The basic idea of the peace process was the idea of separation. That means that for Israelis it meant to get rid of the Arabs. We don't want them. Most of the population was removed to the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority, while most of the land remained with the Israelis. The crisis now is because of the consistent Israeli refusal to accept the Palestinian right. After all, the Palestinians accepted basically a compromise based of a Palestinian state in 20% of the land, leaving the Israelis 80% of the land, and this was not accepted by the Israelis.
Okay, here we go back to Stuart. We just try to have like some kind of discussion also with the panelists here. And so, Stuart, go ahead.
There's no question in my mind, to whatever limited extent I might know the history, that there are injustices on any side of this issue, just as there are injustices in our own country, the United States of America, without getting off the subject. When I look up the map of the United States and I think of the American-Mexican War, about 20% of the landmass of the United States was taken from the Mexicans as a result of war. Just as an analogy, this 80% or 20% of the land that we call Israel, that was called Palestine before, I guess, the 48 UN vote. I look at this map, I see this little dot called Israel, this little dot inhabited by both Israelis and Arabs, who in many times in history that you guys know better than me have lived peacefully. And then there have been disruptions and eruptions from time to time. I look at the result of the 67 war, which unfortunately for Israel, they took back some of these other territories and have led to the various intifadas and whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
Because the borders are indefensible borders. There's 9 miles at the most narrow point. So this is what I want to ask the gentleman, and I can't remember the names. Then I'll stop talking.
Okay.
The gentleman who, excuse me, just one second, Brahim.
Okay.
Described as the Palestinian Christian who responded to me. What do you want? What would you suggest would be a favorable, equitable, fair solution that would
that's a good question. And in fact, here we talk about the peace process, etc. In fact, Amnon, the academic, in the last segment, he was talking about the peace process and what's happening with that. But any comments here, Vaughn, Nuri?
I quickly want to say that I think the problem is with the Israeli government, and there are so many Jewish people, including their religious leaders, that are not very pleased. They're horrified with what is happening with the Israeli government. It's not about Jewish people at all. It's about the government and the problems that they are creating. And I know that there are many Palestinians that are totally opposed to these suicide bombings. They do not believe this is the answer, and they believe in a nonviolent attempt to try to solve this problem.
Yeah, good. Let's go to another segment because here this is Michael Warshawski, and also this is from After Jenin, just like the other 2 previous segments. And here we're talking about the opposition to Israeli policies from Israel itself. And so it is instructive, in fact, to talk about that. So when it's ready.
My feeling is terrible sadness to see the lack of any moral or political boundaries on Israeli behavior. It's pure brutality on the collective level and on the individual level.
Israelis don't have any grasp of what it means for Palestinians to undergo this every single day. 2-3 hours to work with searches and with, all the humiliating processes. What's amazing to me is that so many people are still eager to go there and do that service with the thought that they're keeping to the highest moral standards. And the occupation was never more observable, never more brutal. It became like a monster.
The weekly demonstration against the occupation by the Israeli group, Women in Black, brings out counter-demonstrators whose view is that the occupation hasn't gone far enough. Get rid of the Arabs, is what they're shouting. These demonstrators are settlers, Sharon's people.
No Arabs, no terror! No Arabs, no terror! No Arabs, no terror!
Women in Black think getting rid of the Arabs is something Sharon might try and do.
What I see is a terrible seizure of wanton cruelty and craziness here. And at this point, I think we're very dependent on the outside world, because we don't seem to be able to stop ourselves. I think we're in a frenzy of killing, of brutality, and of revenge.
I think the best way to press the point that the occupation is illegitimate and the occupation is a form of apartheid is to treat it as apartheid was treated, which means restriction on visas, boycott of trade, etc. I think people should not buy Israeli goods and be vocal about it until the Israeli politicians, the Israeli public realize that what they're doing is unacceptable and that there's a personal cost to it.
I don't think that anything but international pressure could stop Israel right now. The impunity of Sharon and the impunity of the Israeli army is for Sharon another green light to go on. Sharon's conception, and I think he's right, is that from the 11th of September, he has a free hand to implement his policy of pacification of the West Bank. In the famous interview of Sharon a few weeks after he was elected, he says, "We don't want normality. Maybe in 100 years, now we are still in the process of building our nation and building our country. For that, we have to reintroduce the old discourse that the whole world is against us." Our priority for the next 100 years is to continue the war of independence, the war of creating the state of Israel.
So here we have like a view from Israel itself, and look at the settlers. They want to get rid of the Arabs who are occupiers in their own judgment, because maybe they are fundamentalists in terms of looking at the Bible, etc. But before we go ahead, we have a caller from Kailua Kona. Carol, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi. You know, it's fascinating listening to you folks this evening, and I have traveled through Palestine and Israel, and I found that the Palestinians were really set upon by the Arabs. And the bottom line is that you can't have peace without justice. And it was about 10 years ago, but the Palestinians couldn't even get building permits to put toilets and modernized, because we treated them just like we did the Indians. The Israelis are treating them like we just wiped out the Indians to take their land. And I hope, that we can resolve this, because if the Palestinians really aren't getting a fair shake. So that's what I have to say, but keep going, guys. You're doing good.
Well, thank you, Carol. Mahalo.
All right.
All right. Thanks. So any more comments on Carol's or the video, in fact? Yeah.
I would like to add to the theme that you were talking about and to explain some of the things that were on these segments. The Israeli government, the present Israeli government in particular, does not want peace. And peace in their mind is to get rid of all the Palestinians and occupy all their lands. That's what they have been doing. They took advantage of the last 10 years, the peace process, to get rid of the very important decisions by the UN, the 242 and 338
these
resolutions, which ask Israel to go back to the 1967 borders. They wanted to get rid of that. So they went into all kinds of false attitudes and sham kinds of talks with the Palestinians, and all what they were doing were increasing the number of settlements in the West Bank. So now the situation has become impossible for the Palestinians. It isn't anymore a life at all.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, later on we're going to show a map of the settlements, and show how many settlements there have been over the years. And it's just really like the West Bank and Gaza, which is 22% of historic Palestine, in fact, is just strewn with settlements all over, And so, anyway, we can show that later on. But Nuri, would you like to add some of your comments on these issues?
Well, I don't, want to be repetitious, but, you were talking about the new historians, and I think that if anybody is interested in this issue, they definitely have to read the new historians. I was just looking at, there's one man, this article actually is on the UN site, and his name is Jerome Slater. And after looking in the archives that you were mentioning were uncovered, they have Ben Gurion, of course, who was the first prime minister of Israel, and there's recorded statements by him saying that this acceptance of the piece of land that has been given us by the UN in the very beginning in 1947, we will accept this, and from there we will go on to get more land. And of course they want, basically, Israel, the people who want a larger Israel want the biblical Israel. That's why they're always using biblical terms, and it's much bigger than the piece of land that they have, and actually it's bigger even than including the rest. And so the interesting thing is that Sharon has always been very interested and planning for and implementing the increase of the settlements. And he has always said, I don't want to give them up. And right now, actually, as Ramses was saying, the settlements and all the roads that connect to the settlements and permit the military to protect the settlements,
go ahead.
they for instance, I read this recently, you can travel the length of the West Bank on the Israeli roads, which of course the Palestinians aren't allowed to use, without seeing a single Palestinian. They're being confined into smaller and smaller little places. They're just suffocating.
Bantustans.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a map later on we're going to show. But we have a caller from Kahala. John, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a couple of comments. First, about this road that...
I can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The first comment I have is about the roads that she was speaking of. There's a reason that they were separated, and because they've been shot at and bombed and separated from the Palestinians to attack them. And it's not that they're direct routes from city to city, they go miles out of the way, and they go around other places. They're not directly. My second comment is how you can have a round-table discussion with only one point of view.
Well, you see, this is our humble attempt to counter the points of view on the other side by Fox News, CNN, and the rest of it, you know.
Fox News, CNN, and the rest of them, if you listen to them, you don't hear every day of what happens, of how many people, how many terrorists are caught every day on their way either into settlements or out of, or into the past the green line.
Okay, and then the other thing is that you have called, and Stuart, if you were listening earlier, has called, and we give him more time than what our point of view would get on Fox News 13. So thank you very much, John. Another caller, Cynthia from Kailua. Go ahead, Cynthia, you're on the air. Hello?
Me?
Yeah, Cynthia.
Then, yes, I have to say that last caller, John, I'm sorry. He's a typical American that's so uninformed and so biased because the media decides to bias the information that comes to us. The free medium where America and the world can get the true stories of the Mullah in the West Bank is the internet, where the non-governmental agencies have put together reams and reams of stories and pictures, and these are from people around the world that are just looking to help the refugees and help bring some sense of humanity to the area.
Right.
I am very disappointed as an American. I'm a first-generation American Palestinian. My parents, both of them, were born and raised in Ramallah and Batunia. And you know what? They grew up under the occupation from 1917, first with the British and then with the Israelis. America, the world is not getting the truth. When Americans decide to open up and do more than sit in front of the TV that is run and managed by a biased media and reporters, why is it that we can't get the news out from the West Bank as it should be? Why is it that there are such violations against humanity? And America has shut down, has decided not to listen, not to report, not to be fair, not even to care what the carnage is over there. When an Israeli soldier is killed, it's run on the news for days. When the hundreds of Palestinians are killed, it's mum.
Yeah, that's
sad. How sad
Yes.
that America, as a progressive country that we are
well, but they are supporting, you know, Israeli terrorism and Israeli state-sponsored terrorism. And thank you, Cynthia, for this. For that one, we have another segment by George Eudes talking about Israeli terrorism. So we're ready.
I think there is both Israeli-sponsored terrorism and Israeli state terrorism. When you have settlers firing guns at Palestinian farmers who are simply trying to harvest their crops, when you have acts of violence by Israeli settlers against Palestinians in the towns where the Palestinians have lived for their whole lives, and you have the Israeli soldiers protecting those settlements and enabling expansion of those settlements, I think that's clearly state terrorism. I think also the settlements themselves are a clear violation of the Geneva Conventions. They are in violation of UN resolutions. Then you have the acts of the Israeli military, where you bring populations like that together and, in a sense, provoke these acts of violence by the settlers against the Palestinians. And then maybe you have some Palestinians who have acts of violence against the Israeli settlers because they have taken the Palestinian land and they are constantly attacking the Palestinians. You bring in the army to so-called resolve the situation, and the army is the Israeli army, and their main object is to protect the Israeli settlers. So their violence is directed against the Palestinians. Some of it is under the name of collective punishment, which itself is a violation of the Geneva Conventions.
Yeah, you know, one should be open-minded about, you know, Israeli atrocities against the Palestinians, etc. One shouldn't be just closed to that. I condemn suicide bombers, you know, but that doesn't mean that the whole Palestinian cause is, should be gone down the tubes. And those Israelis, settlers that we saw in a couple of segments earlier, talking about Arab occupiers who were they were there for generations. I mean, and these guys came from New York, you know, from
Eastern
you
Europe.
know, and Eastern Europe and other places. So I mean, you know, justice has to be told in that.
Worse than that. They said they were causing terror.
Right.
They were using the rhetoric of our president.
Yeah. So, but before we comment on this, I want us to comment on later on the Barak plan, etc. So what I want to do is go back to George Yudis' segment, because he talks about the Barak plan, and then we can show the plan and comment, I mean the map, and comment on it. So when it's ready.
Many people have the impression that this was really offering the Palestinians a state. And if one looks at the specifics, that's not true at all. I mean, it was a plan where Israel would retain control of over 70% of the Palestinian territories. That means the territories over which Israel gained military control in the '67 war. There would be no such thing as Palestinian sovereignty. I mean, this has been an issue. People talk about, oh, a Palestinian state. The Barak plan envisions small, autonomous Palestinian areas. The comparison has been made between these and the Bantustans that previously existed in South Africa.
Yeah, so here, you know, George talking about the Barak plan and so on, and we have a map we're gonna show on the Elmo when it's ready. So maybe Ramses, you would wanna talk about it, yeah.
Right.
You can go ahead and
Now the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are shown here in gray, and the actual land that Israel has controlled and now is not going to give away is the dark color. The Gaza Strip is that little part on the seashore, and you can see here the West Bank land, which Israel grabbed in 1967 and wouldn't give away, and now is pretending that it's going to give away. It's been divided into little enclaves, which are surrounded by roads, and these roads are not allowed for the Palestinians. They are only roads for the Israelis, and it's mainly guarded and patrolled by Israeli patrols all the time. And the Arabs are only allowed to use rundown and terrible roads, and they can be restricted to their own cantons or Bantustans by several means, like curfews, like closures, like restrictions, and actually, this is not a life anymore.
Yeah.
This is a misery. Now, nobody in history has seen anything like that before, except in South Africa.
There's another map we're going to show. It shows the settlements, etc., and the you know, oppression under which the Palestinians have been living. So, yeah, right, that map. Could you comment on that, Ramses?
Well, the Israeli settlements are shown in triangular areas, strewn all over the map. This is the map of the West Bank again, and Gaza Strip on the left-hand side. And we can see three shades of dark brownish and lighter brown, and then the light beige color. These are three areas: Area A, Area B, and Area C. Area A is the darkest, and it is supposed to be given to the Palestinians under their jurisdiction from the civil point of view and from the security point of view, while the lighter colored smaller areas are also given to the Palestinians, but only to run the civil life, everyday life, while the security is jointly run by both Israelis and Palestinians. The white areas, which constitute the main part of the West Bank actually is called Area C. And this Area C is, from the civil point of view and from a security point of view, run by the Israelis only.
So, in fact, the Barak plan talks about giving 90% of Area A and B to the to a Palestinian state, for instance, and forgetting about Area C, which is most of the West Bank.
Exactly.
Right.
So they wanted to force this on the Palestinians and say that it is a very fair and very just solution to the problem, and that Yasser Arafat made the mistake of his life by coming out of the conference refusing to accept this solution. Actually, who can ever give away his own land in this way and accept that his people, his nation, would be living in
Bantustans, cantons, like leopard spots.
Of course, until this day, until this moment, more land of the Palestinians is being confiscated for the building of more roads that are going to restrict to a greater extent the life of the Palestinians.
We have a couple of more minutes left, and we have another segment to show, which is a short segment. But any comments, Vaughn, on this?
I do. I think part of the problem is, I'm very into big pictures, is I think our president could do so much more if he was trying to really build peace there instead of trying to cause wars on this earth. He has put so many stipulations on the Palestinians that they're never going to be able to live up to those. And presidents before him have made a deliberate effort to try to bring people to the table. I don't see him doing that.
Okay. We just have one more segment to show quickly. Go ahead.
يعني أنا لما أقاتل عدو وإشي بكون قلبي قاسي؟ لا، أنا بدي أدافع عن وطني، بدي أدافع عن مخيمي. بعدين يعني إحنا مش راح نعمل سلام معهم، حتى لو رئيسنا اللي هو رئيسنا إذا عمل سلام معهم ممكن هو يتصالح معهم. بس أنا مش راح أعمل سلام. صحيح أنا طيبة ويعني بحب الناس، بس هدول الناس ما بنحبوا. هم أجوا على أرضنا، إحنا بندافع عن أرضنا. أنت لما يسلم نفرض سلبوا ابنك، مش بدك تدافع عن ابنك وتسوي عنه؟ وإحنا كمان هاي أرضنا زي كأنها إمنا كل إشي عنا. بعدين يعني زي ما حكوها النسوان ما خلصوش. راح نضلنا ننجب أطفال وننجب يعني رجال أقوى من اللي راحوا وأشجع من اللي راحوا.
Yeah, well, we're going to wrap it up, but thank you very much for sharing this time with us. And thank you, viewers. And until next month, mahalo nui loa. Yeah.